Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. I am your host Keith and today I am chatting with Ruth Franklin from Secret Paradise. Hello Ruth.
Hi Keith, good to see you.
Good to see you again.
I know it's only been a few short days, although it seems like an unearthly long period of time since I saw you 3 days ago.
I know. So Ruth is based in the Maldives and runs a company called Secret Paradise. And Ruth now lives in the Maldives, and Ruth's company, Secret Paradise, is it's the only company that really is operating sustainable tourism through the Maldives. So, Ruth, do you want to just start off giving us a bit of a background about how you ended up in the Maldives and how Secret Paradise came about?
Yeah, sure. So as people can tell from my accent, I do hail from the UK, and I did 28 years in UK retail. I learned to dive while I took a sabbatical, and that then led me on a girls' dive trip to the Maldives, which was intended to be a once-in-a-lifetime dive holiday, and then turned into me returning to the Maldives twice, 3 times a year to dive. The Maldives, for whatever reason, and I can't put my finger on it, but it did grab at my heartstrings, hence why I kept returning. Because I'd worked for a retail company for such a long time, I was very fortunate to have a clause in my contract that allowed me to take 3 months paid holiday for 1 year after 25 years service. So I knew at that point I wanted to be in the Maldives for that time, but felt I ought to do something constructive, so came out to do my dive master. And whilst here, I was at coffee on the beach with friends, and a friend of a friend joined us. He was a local engineer by trade, working for a resort, doing erosion and reclamation. And it was the year the law had changed in the Maldives to allow guest houses to operate on local islands. So previous to that, apart from a couple of years where there were a few guest houses on islands close to Mali, as a tourist, you had the option to be on a boat or to stay on a private island resort. So opening up local islands to tourists through the form of guest houses really opened up the Maldives to a wider market, and also allowed people who perhaps hadn't counted the Maldives as a destination to visit, because when they visit a destination, they want to get under the skin of the country, meet local people, see what happens in day-to-day life. And so we debated this over a couple of evening coffees. I thought nothing more of the conversation. I went back to the UK into my job, and then I had a telephone call from him to ask, should we set something up? So without blinking an eyelid, I said, yes, let's do something, but we didn't set out with a game plan. I handed in my notice coming out to the Maldives thinking, worst case scenario, I'll just end up back in the UK if things don't go to plan. So when I got here, I looked at what other adventure operators were doing in Asia. I travelled with people like Exodus and Intrepid in my younger days, and decided that we could implement a tour in the Maldives that hopped between local islands, providing the activities people would expect to do, snorkeling, sunset safaris, etc., with more cultural engagement. So we introduced dining in the home of a local family, looking how to cook Maldivian food, really sharing the history and culture of the Maldives through the eyes of a local guide. And really, 10 years ago, that is how it all started.
So, I mean, I think that was always my outlook on the Maldives was always it was the honeymoon destination. Like you went and stayed in a bungalow on stilts with a slide that went into the water. That was always kind of my view of the Maldives. I think that's probably most people's view of the Maldives, isn't it?
It is indeed. And that's not just the consumer, that's also really the travel industry. Local tourism, although it's 12 years old, has really only scratched the surface. And the perception, as you quite rightly say, is of this other side of the Maldives that is completely different to what you can experience if you're visiting a local island.
So basically, the Maldives is set up in atolls, and then within the atolls there are multiple islands. What is the percentage of local islands compared to private resort islands?
So currently there are approximately 185 resort islands, with other islands actually being built and developed as we speak. And there are just under 300 local inhabited islands. And then the rest of the 1,200 islands that comprises of the Maldives, there or thereabouts, it will continue to grow as we continue to reclaim islands. It's all uninhabited, so sandbanks and uninhabited islands full of forest and white beaches.
So I was lucky enough to come out with you last week. You invited a few tour operators out to have a look at the real Maldives. And we've already been in discussions for some time about putting a trip together. Do you want to just talk through the reason why you put the package together that we went and did last week?
Yeah, sure. So if you look at a map of the Maldives, the archipelago stretches from north to south over 850 kilometres. So it's approximately the same size as the UK north to south. If you then split that into 3/3, the central section, which is most closest to Mali and most accessible in terms of transportation, is the area of the Maldives that is very developed from a tourism point of view, obviously from resort, but more recently in terms of guest houses, because the transportation is affordable. In a lot of cases, it's by speedboat. It can be by public ferry if you're going to a local island. And post the pandemic, we wanted to take our trips out of this central area, as personally I feel it's on the cusp of over-tourism, and also to allow people to experience the Maldives that I remember 20 years ago. That is the quiet, gentle, laid-back environment where you have a local community and the opportunity for them to really engage with that. So whilst we didn't want to take ourselves out of an area that was accessible to the Maldives, we then looked at how we can get to islands that were accessible by speedboat, but gave this a little bit more off the beaten tourist track, I guess, for want of a better expression. And hence we moved west to Goidu, or Horsberg Atoll, which is the southern part of Bar Atoll. It falls into the same administration area. Bar Atoll is known for Hanifaru Bay and its aggregation of manta rays during the May to October period. So within Goidu Atoll, there are 3 inhabited islands: Goidu, Fahendu, and Fuladu. Speedboat accessible and can easily hop between them. There are no resorts in this area. It's very quiet in the way of boat traffic, and there's a beautiful string of 6 or 7 sandbanks dependent on the ocean current that you can also hop between, as well as a couple of inhabited islands. So it really does get people away to the Maldives. That, as I say, is something that I reminisce about from my first initial visits.
Yeah, I think you definitely managed to achieve what you set out to achieve in terms of the itinerary, because it was, I have never seen, I've dived all over the world, and I've never seen water that color. It was that typical picture postcard, some of those beaches where the sand, you always think that they've been enhanced and they've been fiddled around with and the colors have been changed in, but pictures I don't think did them justice in terms of how amazing those colors were. Like when we went out onto that sandbank and did the Robinson Crusoe style uninhabited island, like the colors there were just unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. It's, I think, the light and the reflection. I gather Kame gave it a new colour code and it's now called the Unreal Blue.
Yeah. I think Dulux have already about to patent that, I think. But I mean, and the thing that I loved the most was like when we were in Goidu, when we first arrived there, like we were the only tourists on the island. There was no other tourists there at the time we were there. We went on we went on a walk around the island, which obviously doesn't take very long to walk around the island. But on the way back, all the locals were playing volleyball, and your guides who were with us the whole time were brilliant, and they were like, "Come on, let's go and join in with the locals game." And for like 45 minutes, we went and played volleyball with the locals, and it was just such a lovely experience to just feel like you were part of the community.
Yeah, and I think in terms of traveling with a guide, it obviously allows them to open doors that perhaps if you're traveling independently may not be as easy to do so. So definitely there are things that we can offer with a guided tour that you have the opportunity to really get beneath the skin of that country and engage with people in a comfortable way where, Maldivians are very hospitable. They'll stand and chat with people. They'll welcome them into their homes. But there's certainly that added addition where there's that engagement, as you say, in terms of just picking up on something that's a normal day-to-day activity for them. But you're really getting to be involved and feel part of the island community.
I think that was the biggest shock for me when I went onto the local islands was the facilities that every local island had, like the play parks for the kids, were all like one of the islands had a skateboard park. They all had astroturfed football pitches. They all had a medical centre. The islands are very well. Even the second island we went to only had 60 people live on that island, and they still had the same facilities on that island as all the other islands with more and more people.
Yeah, I think in general, the infrastructure is far more advanced than people like yourself would expect. And I guess we have to put it into perspective in terms of as an island nation, being able to get to island or back into the capital for services is not something that's easily done. So to ensure that education and medical service can take place, it's important that that infrastructure is there. And obviously, as a tropical destination, most of our time is spent out of doors when you're not at work in an office environment. So having those facilities, particularly for the children and the youth of the island, is really important.
Yeah, I suppose people, it was very obvious in Mali, in the capital, that, most people want to base themselves either in Mali or Hula Mali, which is, the island that they've created to cover people wanting to be near the capital. But I suppose if you want people to stay on the islands, then you do need to be giving them services and things to do on the islands, don't you?
Absolutely, yes. I guess in terms of their forefathers would have definitely had a very relaxed lifestyle. They would just go out fishing. The ladies would cook the meal. They would sit around in the jolies that you guys enjoyed hanging about in, and sit and chat and have coffee. And they made their own entertainment. And as generations have moved forward, whilst going for coffee, sitting and chatting. And now, obviously, technical services in terms of phones and iPads and what have you make a bigger part of day-to-day life. There is still an aspect of bringing the community together to be able to provide entertainment and structure for them, to have a standard of living outside of the capital that is still relaxed and still has an island flavour to it. It isn't a case of just sitting there and twiddling your thumbs for the young generation.
Yeah, I think. We obviously came into Mali airport, and somebody had said to me, Sean, my business partner, was in the Maldives last year, year before, I think. And, she said that the airport, like when you walk out of that airport, you just won't believe it. And you literally step off the plane, come out through the doors, and the color of the water in front of you, and everybody's there getting on boats. And you see the seaplanes taking off, and you kind of feel like, this is completely different to anything else that I've seen before when I've come to an airport. Like, these airports just don't exist anywhere else.
Yeah, it is sort of a magical moment. And I think, perhaps that's one of the reasons why people fall in love with the Maldives, because that's instantaneous connection with the ocean as soon as you arrive, and whether that you're being zoomed off on a speedboat or you're taken to the air by seaplane or domestic flight, there is a connection to the ocean that's immediate. And as you say, it's the colour, and so many people do say about the colour. And I have to admit that I guess, I need sometimes people like yourself reminding me about it, because it's something that's there on a day-to-day basis. And I don't necessarily, I forget about that it's a wow factor, and that I'm very fortunate in that sense to live in the destination that offers that type of paradise moment.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ruth, next time you're in London, you can come to our office in Essex and we'll go to the seaside and I'll show you what we've got up there. And then at that point, it will be a quick reminder of what you've got at home.
You're on, I'll keep you to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think
go for it only if we get ice cream on the pier.
Yeah, we'll get ice cream on the pier. We'll go and get a Rossi's on the pier. That's fine. But I think the biggest surprise for me from the trip, although all the wow moments, like the thing that I took away from the trip was the education that I received into the problems that the Maldives have at the minute. I think, again, when you see the pristine white sandy beaches and you see the underwater photos and you think, that's amazing, there is a bit of Instagram reality against, Instagram now kind of feel about that, because it isn't all like that in the Maldives, is it? The Maldives currently have quite a few issues, and from a underwater perspective, from a rubbish perspective, and the biggest shock for me was the plastic problem that you have in the Maldives. That's not necessarily all of the Maldives problem, but you're the one that's having to pick up the pieces with it.
Yeah, certainly waste has always been a conversation point. Certainly with the advent of local island tourism, I think that really made a step forward in terms of how communities viewed the entirety of their island. Whilst ladies would very naturally go out as part of their early morning routine to sweep in front of their homes, they wouldn't necessarily have picked up rubbish or cleaned the beaches on a regular basis. So certainly tourism brought that move forward as a positive, because obviously they're very conscious about how tourists view their islands. And it's a little bit like painting the Fourth Road Bridge, isn't it? You go around an island one day and clear up the debris, and then the next day it's all being washed up in the tide again. The challenges certainly are there. And in the 10 years that I've been living here, I've certainly seen progress moving forward in terms of project management, with different islands taking on their own eco initiatives in terms of waste management. So on many local islands now, waste is segregated. Parley Maldives, who are part of the worldwide organisation Parley, recycled plastic is exported out of the Maldives and then turned into football shirts and football boots. And there's definitely other projects that are being filtered down by the government in terms of how we manage waste within each of the atolls, as opposed to it just being one central waste island, which for the best part of the tourism 50 years, that has been the case. I guess from a plastic point of view, the Maldives is committed to removing single-use plastic by the end of 2024. Last month, we're in May now, aren't we? In April, they introduced a tax on single-use plastic bags. So that will be a way of reducing the blue plastic bags that we see everywhere, and you're handed in every store, more or less. And there's a lot of plastic goods that are no longer imported now, that would have been high up on the single-use plastic listing.
Yeah, we did a couple of beach cleans while we were over there, and just the amount of, and this just proved to me how this wasn't a Maldives problem, because it was the amount of fishing nets and fishing that we were pulling in off the water. bringing them onto the beach. And obviously in the Maldives, they don't use fishing nets. They line fish everything. So it's not your issue. It's coming from elsewhere. And because you're stuck in the middle of the Indian Ocean, everything is coming through your islands, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It's a trade route, so you've got the ocean currents, so it's a thoroughfare. And the same as other island destinations. It's there's an aspect of, yes, we obviously produce a certain amount of our own rubbish, and the tourism industry has a very large percentage of that. But we do have the plague of plastic and rubbish coming from all over the world. And it's interesting, as you said, so on some occasions you've got a bottle and you can see where that bottle's come from by the brand or the naming. And even in terms of when the dates, some of the dates on there, if they're clear, understanding how long that item has been floating around in the ocean and may not have been its first destination. The Maldives may not be its first destination. It could have washed up on a beach somewhere else in the world before hitting us.
And I think one of the pleasures for me when I was on my trip was meeting Sendy on Fuladu. Now, Sendy's going to come and do a podcast with me in a couple of weeks' time. And Sendy was the first ever dive instructor to work in the Maldives, and he'd been a diver for 40 years. And now he classes himself as a environmentalist, campaigner. And speaking to him and spending time with him and listening to the, in the scheme of things, the small project that he's trying to create was just eye-opening, like of what he's trying to achieve in terms of the coral in the Maldives. Because again, it's one of your biggest selling points from an ecological point of view. The Maldives needs the corals to survive. And obviously, with everything that's happening in the world at the minute with global warming, there is a real fear of what's going to happen to the corals, isn't it?
There is, and I think there's two sides to that. There are those who are quite comfortable that the Maldives will continue to be here because coral grows towards the light. And so all the islands have a coral base, so they're going to continue to keep up with the water levels. And then the other side of the coin is really down to, well, actually, how is global warming going to impact the rise of ocean sea level? And in terms of, it's about a balance. So can the growth of the coral keep up with the increase in ocean levels?
But I think, for me, it was seeing the different corals. Obviously, we went to 3 different islands. We scuba dived, we snorkeled, and it was seeing the health of the corals in different places and seeing how some of it was quite bleached still, whereas others were in pristine conditions. Sendy has a coral garden where he's looking at how he can grow coral again to try and replicate it and grow it naturally, but be able to move it at the same time, which for me was just fascinating, seeing what he's doing to try and, if it suddenly, because we saw a couple of projects where they were using frames to grow the coral on. And like Sendy was saying, like those frames are always going to stay there. So if it ever gets bleached again, then that's it. It's had it. But what Sendy's trying to do is grow coral on small concrete plugs. So if the sea level starts to, or if the sea temperatures start to rise in the shallows, he can actually move it into the deeper sections and try and see if it continue to grow there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As you're aware, I attended the Coral Festival in Adu this weekend. Lots of individuals there from a scientific background, as well as the NGOs and marine life organisations from the Maldives. And it was really interesting to hear from other destinations. The Bahamas were there, the Seychelles were there, talking about the work that's being done in terms of exactly as Send is doing there. So it's about trying and testing and seeing what works, because one process might not work in one location. It can also be about the sea currents and how much movement there is. Some corals only will grow in particular environments, and particular conditions. So it's ensuring that where coral nurseries are being developed, it's the right type of coral that's also being planted and used to create new coral reefs, but also in terms of, as you're saying there, the different ways of being able to attach it for perhaps different environments and different sea coral bed flats.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what I learned so much from what were we there, 7 days? I learned so much in those 7 days that I didn't already know. I learned, so much about the ecosystem of the Maldives. I learned so much about the food of the Maldives, the local people, the traditions. I came away from it thinking, actually, do you know what? This was a really educational trip as well, in terms of, having a lovely time in seeing some amazing things and having those wow factors. I mean, obviously, we've discussed the trip that we're looking to put together now for the Bucket List Company. And obviously, we were there for quite a short period of time. We kind of flew in, got everything done, and flew out again. So we're looking to extend ours a little bit and turn it into a slightly longer trip. And for me, I really enjoyed being on the local islands, being amongst the local people, all of that side of things. But, the one thing that I did think, from a traveler's perspective is, us Brits in the UK, when we go on holiday, we do like to have a little bit of a drink in the evenings and have a nice gin and tonic looking at the sunset. And obviously on the local islands, it is a very strict Muslim country. So on the local islands, there is no alcohol allowed. We have got the option of bar boats and things like that you can go out and have a drink on a bar boat. But I think in terms of, we discussed it once we'd come back to Malé at the end of the trip. And I think from my perspective, I think, a 75-25 split of seeing the real Maldives, but then actually at the end of your trip, not necessarily going to a big resort, but actually having a little bit of that R&R, doing some scuba diving, and just being able to kind of have the end of your holiday with a beer in your hand. I think that could be the perfect trip in terms of going to the Maldives and seeing everything that it has to offer.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, for many people, the Maldives still continues to be a once in a lifetime destination. There's obviously a hell of a lot of the world out there to explore now as well. But in terms of if you come to the Maldives, why wouldn't you combine both aspects? And they both have their positives. I still like going to a resort for a couple of nights, but I couldn't do a longer period of time on a resort. But just having that R&R and the aspect of just being able to sit back and chill, go to the spa perhaps, or as you say, dive or snorkel. It just gives you a really rounded overview of the Maldives experience. So definitely what you're suggesting, I think, really does tick the box and will be of interest and perhaps spike your clients' interest.
Well, I think there's quite a few, my photos in that I was, posting whilst I was away on our various Facebook groups and stuff. There's plenty of interest there already of people who are saying, the Maldives is definitely on my bucket list, and it completely is a bucket list destination without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, like I say, I haven't, when you think of bucket list, you think of wow moment. And I had so many wow moments on that trip where it just kind of, I couldn't believe it, even down to things like the night skies, like, there is no light pollution, like you're on these islands and, the night skies were just so stunning. I mean, I can't wait to go back. I mean, obviously, like I said, it was a very short period of time that we were there for. We couldn't fit in everything that, we kind of wanted to do. I did get to see turtles. I did get to, we were scuba diving, there was dolphins, but I didn't get the manta ray. So I'm definitely going to have to come back out at some point and get that manta ray tick. And obviously as well, if we can get the whale shark in as well, then that would be, I mean, obviously we've been discussing, when do you think, Ruth, the best time is to visit the Maldives?
You can visit the Maldives all year round. Historically, there is very much a dry season and a wet season. So the wet season would be from May to October. But like many places around the world now, weather patterns are changing. And whilst there is a change in seasonality, the actual fact we don't get rain like in the tropics all day, every day. We tend to have short, sharp bursts of thunderstorms, and then it clears again with blue skies and a temperature of 30 degrees pretty much all the way around the year. So I think in terms of what we've been talking about and the experience you've got, the location of Goidu Atoll just below Bar, where the manta rays aggregate during what is low season, would be a really opportune moment, so that being able to tie in all those local experiences you've talked about, but also be able to tick off manta ray encounters and potentially also whale shark encounters. We were looking at July or August, early September at the latest, would really give you a really round encompassed experience with lots of ticks in those boxes.
Yeah, we did one scuba dive while we were there, and I had my dive computer with me. And when I jumped in the water, my dive computer was reading 32-degree water temperature at the surface. And then we went down to, I think 16 meters, I think was the deepest we did on that dive. And my watch was still reading 31 degrees in the water temperature. Just being able to dive in a rash vest and a pair of boardies was just such a lovely experience. If you'd had to put a wetsuit on, you would have melted on the surface because it was very warm. But what would you
have to say? You were there during one of our hottest weeks when it was 40 degrees and you were sweating away from the whole of you.
It was very, very warm, and it was quite humid as well. It was kind of like, being in Dubai or somewhere like that in the middle of the summer. But
it comes down to, as I was saying that a moment ago, you're just on the cusp of the change of seasons. So it was a little bit less breeze. So very humid.
Yeah. What would you say to people then, Ruth, to finish us off? What would you say to people who have that expectation in their mind that the Maldives is a couple's destination, honeymoon destination, and they are a solo traveler and they don't think the Maldives is for them? What advice would you give to those people?
To look at local islands as a exploration, discovery. Local islands can still mean beaches, albeit they are bikini beaches, to ensure that when guests are elsewhere on the island, particularly as ladies, we dress more modestly. But the Maldives has so much diversity in terms of the vegetation. There are mangroves, there's agriculture, all these aspects that people don't necessarily associate. And from a solo traveller point of view, travelling with a guide gives you a company. Going on group travel with somebody such as the Bucket List Company gives you people who are wanting to experience similar things to yourself, and you have a combined desire to tick those bucket list opportunities. So travelling the Maldives for sure isn't just for people who want to stay at resorts, for honeymooners, for couples. It is definitely now for solos, for friends, and for those people who want to explore, who just aren't into the whole fly and flop scenario, or not into necessarily being at a private island resort, but want to be able to get out, stretch their legs, and discover new experiences.
Well, Ruth, I always finish when we have a new guest on the show. I always finish and ask them, what is on your bucket list? Obviously, living in the Maldives, you've done that bit, but what is left on Ruth's bucket list that you want to achieve?
I would like to go to Cuba. That's always been on my bucket list for a while. And my other destination is Cambodia. I did Vietnam, but I didn't go over to Cambodia. So they're my two different sides of the globe. So at some point, when I put Secret Paradise on the back burner and leave it to others, my plan is to go and do a little bit more traveling, because I really enjoyed traveling when I was in my 20s and my 30s, and there's still whole lot of the world out there to explore.
Well, we've got a trip to Vietnam and Cambodia, and then we're also launching a trip in June to Cuba as well, Ruth. So maybe you can jump on and join us then. Well, Ruth, thanks ever so much for coming on and doing the podcast with me today. It's been really interesting to hear your views and your stories on the Maldives, and I cannot wait to come back out with the group. There is fights in the office over who's going to lead that first trip, but they can fight all they like because there's only Ruth, thank you ever so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on. Thank you everyone for listening today. I hope you've enjoyed this, and we will be launching a Maldives trip very, very soon. So if you are interested in heading out to the Maldives and what we've discussed sounds really interesting to you, then keep your eyes on the Bucket List Company's website, and you'll see that trip get launched. But until next week, thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.